Hey everyone, this is Maha,
And this is Dylan.
and we're the hosts of That Wasn't Too Bad, where we discuss everything from process improvement all the way down to existential dread and even more.
It's going to be awesome, as usual.
As usual, indeed. So tell me, Dylan, what's today's topic?
After 5 episodes digging deep into Toyota production system, their philosophy, how people have spun it, how people have failed, we thought it's going to be more helpful maybe to dig deeper into some really helpful tools that you can use in your daily life. So we've got 4 or 5, depending on how you count, tools for organizing and thinking about your work. And we're going to start with the vanilla, and then we're going to go a little bit crazy on some of them. These can help you a lot. These could help you a little. A lot of people do them wrong. It should be plenty exciting today.
I think so too. From my side, at least, I haven't done a few of them in quite a while, so I just thought of how I could use them personally on a personal level too. So I think this is going to be a very fruitful conversation, and it's going to show people that it's not just used on a professional or corporate level, but you could do that on your own, at home, yourself, to help add a little bit of control into your life.
That's exactly right. I have done that myself.
There we go. So let's get started.
Maha, I know I have seen enough Swimlane diagrams in my life to feel like I know them pretty well, but I think most of us in our working life have seen them, but never really dug in deep into maybe the subtleties or how to actually put one together. Can you walk us through a Swimlane diagram? What is it good for, and how can you use it best?
I am one of those people that you probably dislike, Dylan, because I learned about Swimlane diagrams from many of my engineering folks. And then I brought it into HR because I thought it was an amazing visual to have, to just visualize some very high level processes that they actually have, and then to start digging deeper into them, to start understanding the processes on kind of on a single process level as well. The way that I've done that is I just pretty much did not learn what a swim lane was, just saw it visually and just applied it. So I'm going to show you my swim lane, Dylan. I'm going to let you judge me profusely, and then you're going to have to tell me, whether I have angered the diagram gods by my perception or my understanding of swim lanes. Would that be okay?
Also known as our listeners. Yes, let's.
Yes. Okay. So I have designed a swim lane for kind of the top level sort of processes in a department that we were working on from a transformational level, and then gave them an example on how to handle kind of drawing out their processes on a more process oriented level. So each and every process should have its own kind of swim lane designed to it too. So I'm going to share my screen. You're going to have to excuse the crazy amount of tabs that I have open, because that's just how my brain works. Well, I can hide that.
For those of you listening while you wash the dishes or walk the dog or on your commute, we'll have all these in the description below. You can click on them later. Please don't click on them while you're driving. And I will do my best to describe, along with Maha, what these things look like.
Oh, that is awesome. Actually, didn't think about that. Thank you for being focused on our listeners and inclusive with that, Dylan.
They are important people.
They are indeed. So look at this butte. It's not really a butte, but it's fine. I did not have the right software. I usually would design these things on things like Visio, for example, which a lot of you guys in the corporate world know how expensive that is. So I just used something called diagram.io that I really like, or drawings.io. Dylan, please judge me.
This is beautiful. I think I like this better than Visio.
And it's free.
I like the colors. Yeah. About someone challenged them. So
So just
tell us, yeah, walk us through the intent, the value stream that you're mapping in this picture.
so this is the very top level value stream that I was actually trying to show based on each and every, let's say, new order or new request that this organization was going to get. This organization was focused on external communication whenever they had new campaigns or whenever they had to do anything else. They had a really hard issue aligning their new, let's say, they had a really hard time aligning their new department with their new roles to existing processes, because they just went through a reorg. They have now things called, they have now people called campaign runners, but then the campaign runners were not really understanding their place in the organization, especially that the organization shifted from waterfall into agile. So what I've done,
these are the things that I really like about this, that you have called out teams, which is not something I see in Swimlane diagrams very much. Very frequently, I see them like the horizontals are a group or a team or some sort of tribe within the larger corporation, but you have them broken down into voices, which is a lot more woke and a lot more almost like perspectives, where you have someone speaking to, maybe, I hope I'm reading this right, someone speaking to the editorial, to the creative, to the campaign runner role. What does experience mean in that squad?
So that squad takes care of how, because this is a communication starter campaign. So it's about being able to give the audience the experience, the desired experience from, for example, a campaign or something like that. So you can see this as someone like an experience officer or like a happiness officer that you sometimes find in an organization, where what they do is they do the kind of the final touch-ups to make sure that whoever the campaign is for actually enjoys it and actually kind of goes through the process. So their role was really new in general, I think, not only within this organization, but across the industry and across a lot of industries, but I really liked it. It's like an experience officer. They were focused more on the experience of the client, or in this case, whoever the campaign was aimed at.
Perfect. So if I was like a nerd and I really liked acronyms and job descriptions, this might be a CX role or a UX role.
Kind of similar, yeah. But then from a pure communications perspective, and I really, I liked the leader of this organization and what they thought about, in all honesty. But no, you would see something like their forum as well. For example, their LTs on there, their engagement team is on there, and these kind of, just like you said, these are groups of different people from different parts of, from different sub-departments within that organization, who collate together, who drive certain things or who have certain responsibilities. So sometimes, for example, I had to remove the name, but one of their main intranet pages, which is my blah, 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 actually started off, any decision started off within the corporate positioning and then moved along to the engagement to get approved and for the squad to be built. I did this highlighted as kind of a broken down line because it's optional based on the campaign size, for example.
Right. I think one of the reasons that that Swimlane diagrams make me grumpy is because the arrows often are not linear. Like if you can rearrange the bars along the side to make one of the processes go in a row, and then all the rest of them are all messed up, and something about that annoys me. But so you have to be a pretty decent graphic designer to make it line up pretty well and still fit on a page.
And what I think is really important here, I mean, I've seen diagrams like that being set vertically, excuse me. And vertically just never worked well with me. From my experience, at least, and then from probably a visualization perspective as well, if you're working in a lot of countries where texts basically and timelines start from the left side and not from up and down, for example, it is probably best to focus on a diagram that starts from the left to the right. Top down, I've seen a lot of people confuse the top down or kind of the not virtual, what is wrong with me? Vertical ones. The vertical ones kind of look like process trees. And they're good when you're trying to actually emulate a process tree within a swim lane. And I've seen that happen too. I can show you an example. I still went with the vertical. Come on, example, please load. There we go. So I've still went with kind of the horizontal look.
Yeah, right.
But it still gives you an idea of how that might actually look like when you start breaking each step down. So this was,
This is exactly what I think of as your stereotypical swim lane diagram. And it's got decision trees and it's got yeses and nos and sub-processes.
And each color has kind of a distinction for me, for example. For example, this is both yes, but then this is a yes when it comes to non-digital. This is digital. I don't know. What's funny? Please judge me. Yes, and then this probably reminds you a little bit of what's happening up there, but yeah, anyways.
I like that one. It doesn't surprise me too much, but it is a creative look at how you can use swim lanes to tell maybe a non-standard picture than what people are used to. I've got a slightly more boring one if you want to see one.
I would love to see one from someone who actually kind of like works with it. Like I said, for me, I just saw this in engineering and I was like, yes, I'm bringing this to HR. And it actually really helped. Let me explain why I thought this was going to be super valuable for HR. When I stepped in, they were shifting from kind of a project-based organization now to kind of not to an operational-based organization where the focus is not on building the project, but actually on running it. So a lot of HR processes needed to be aligned to support this transition. The problem is people kind of understood what they were doing, but not understanding it to the depth beyond their role. So when I saw this in engineering, I asked the question of, why do you use Swimlanes? And they're like, it's a really good way of visualizing a process, and it's a really good way for even individuals or for parts of the organization to understand their place in the process. I was like, okay, that sounds great. I'll do that for HR. That's exactly what I've done for that reason. It's a very simple, coherent way usually to visualize a process. I know that there are a multitude of swim lanes out there. This is the more techie side. For me, this is like the post-workshop. It's kind of more the soft side, or it's just a general, like nice, colorful diagram broken down into different segments and different processes. And it really helps. It really helps people understand their part in the organization, why they're important even, which sometimes that purpose thing tells you a lot.
Let's look at one that's slightly different.
Here, let me stop sharing. There we go.
Is it sharing now?
Beautiful, yes.
Is it a swim lane?
I mean, it looks like a swim lane, similar to mine, I would say. But then what I like is how you've actually broken it down a little bit. So it looks to me, not sounds to me, but it sounds to the listeners too, by the way. To explain yours to our listening part, you've actually broken down each and every kind of role from what I see into its own kind of segment within the swim lane. Yours is also horizontal, horizontal in the case that it goes from kind of left to right. And what you've done marvelously is show each segment by each color. So you've segmented them based on color as well. And then the color moves across the organization and
Mhm.
shows you where it goes and how something is done. And I
So
like it.
Maha, this is not a domain that you have a lot of experience in.
No.
Try to, this will be a fun game. Try to explain for our listeners what capability this diagram demonstrates or maps out.
So for someone coming from the outside with a little bit of knowledge on Git, et cetera, from kind of the data science, data analytics side, this tells me how a DevOps organization might actually sort their DevOps, interestingly enough. I see production environment, I see UAT environment, test environment, orchestrator, developable, and then Git repo. So it sounds to me like the sides are a mixture of things. The Git is where the information kind of is coming in and coming out, right? You got two developers at least working on it. One seems to be focusing on the coding, and the other one seems to be on reviewing their code. So there's this partnership aspect. The orchestrator looks really interesting to me because you're saying that this is kind of the person that, after it's being reviewed, takes on the governance of it and then builds something. I can even say that builds the machine learning algorithm or something like that. And then, or builds the app in this case, sorry. And then they test it in the testing environment. The orchestrator plus seems to be in blue, which means they would put the app on Git. It would go to the auto test. There's a functional test in black, which is kind of the test environment. Triangle is a manual process. And then automated processes is in, I forgot what this thing is that has 5 corners.
So I'll help you out. You're doing great. And so I'm really excited to hear that someone who does not do a lot of CI/CD pipeline design themselves, like, got so many of the important ideas. The orchestrator in this case is not a person. Not all the swim lanes need to be people or roles. In this case, it's an environment, or it's a the orchestrator is a just code. It's a program that packet pulls the code down from Git, turns it into an app, and deposits it in the right place.
Okay.
And sends you a text to say that you should go mess with it, or whatever it does. Jenkins is a very popular one these days, and I'm sure Amazon has some blue light special version of it in AWS.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
The only thing that I find interesting is that the assurance so far at the end, right before the process, right before the approval. I'm going to ask you questions about that.
Right. Well, so the other thing, the color coding here that I used is very, very frequently dev teams start when they're a new company, they start with immature code control, because it's just like 1 or 2 people, and they're both checking in codes and they're pushing to prod, and there's like 7 or 8 customers. And so
sometimes performed on prod.
Right. Yeah. You just push it, you do your testing, and everything's kind of ad hoc. And as you grow, it becomes worth it to build out more standardization or automation. So all of these pentagons are things that happen.
That's what it is. A pentagon.
A pentagon. So you might use Artifactory to do code control on your libraries, or your whatever frameworks are using your software supply chain, to make sure that your old version of PHP isn't too old or something like that. So that's a point of governance, but it's an automated one, and someone else is managing your PHP versions to make sure you don't release stuff that's too old. And then there's standardized products that you can use to you just pointed at your environment. The Jenkins kicks off the auto scanner and it just runs. And so a lot of these governance steps are
Necessary.
not, well, they don't cost anybody's time. You set them up once and they just run. So this can be another view of a Swimlane diagram where you show which software is performing which part, or which people sometimes, and which software, and where the handoffs happen between people and software.
I like that, actually.
Yeah. Let's talk about, I guess one thing, a lot of people think about this, but very frequently, the point of a lot of these tools is to make obvious patterns or make things clear. It's 70% of the value is to communicate something to someone who has a hard time reading a data table. And so when you're doing these, just be really thoughtful about who your actual audience is. I once ran a monitoring software that, texted us all when the servers went down way back in the day. And I handed it off to another guy and he couldn't do it because he was colorblind, and the default user interface of this monitoring software was red, green, and yellow. And he didn't know which systems were up or not, because the red and the green looked exactly the same. And so, Maha, exactly to your point about culture and trying to communicate across cultures, think about which direction your audience will expect things to flow. Just reduce those barriers and that friction for them as they understand the story you're trying to tell.
I'm going to also add one more thing, because obviously I really like the legend that you had. I should have even added that on mine, because not a lot of people will understand what a diamond is for example, or anything else like that, especially if they're really new to it. So it's really good to just have a key or have a legend in this visualization, and these visualizations just be able to help the person describe or understand what's happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let's talk about, so use the very traditional, and I would say most kindergarten way, no judgment, I do it too. The swim lane diagrams often are a helpful way of saying not my job. Yeah, this person does that part, and I do this part, and this other person does this part. And it's helpful in that way because it kind of speaks a little bit to the blame. It's a little bit, you stay in your lane, and sometimes that can be unhealthy. Stay in your swim lane. Right. And then sometimes it can be good because it forces you to say, well, does this box go in your lane or my lane? Let's figure it out. And having the discussion is better than being petty about it.
And even if you want to think about something like this, so interestingly enough, I kind of did the opposite with the swim lanes.
Right, where I noticed that.
Yeah. No, but let me tell you why, because people do think in their tiny little box of this process is mine at that time, and then I just shove it off, right? Sometimes they don't understand where the process actually started from, why it actually is ending up on their desk, and why they need to actually hand it off to person A, B, or C. And by visualizing those swim lanes, you're able to say, look, it is not your process alone. You're part of the machinery. You're part of this. You need to ensure accountability on your end, because this is how long the process is going to take right after you kind of submit it, or how many steps it's going to take. And that's why an error like that could tremendously impact A, B, C, and D, and E departments.
Right. That's a great point. And actually, that's a great jumping point to our next artifact, our next tool, the SIPOC. People pronounce this in goofy ways, but I'm going to say SIPOC today.
I just think of Star Trek. So
yes, right. It does have that vibe to it. A SIPOC is most helpful in making sure you didn't forget any boxes on your swim lane diagram, because so it's an acronym and it stands for supplier, input, process, output, customer. And so everything that happens, this is the thing that happens. And for this thing to happen, it needs some prerequisites. So if you're gonna, if you're the network team, for instance, we're gonna go for a technical example again. If you're on the network team and you need to build some routing rules, you need to figure out, well, for the thing I'm building routing rules for, what does it need to do? What does it need to talk to? So you need to go figure that out first. What's this thing do that I'm segmenting? And so how are you going to do that? Well, that's another item on your SIPOC. So this spurs you to think, well, I need to sit down and design the segmentation. What do I need for that? Well, I need to know what the environment's supposed to do, and I need to go talk to the project team for that. And you just kind of work your way down until you have all of the necessary unit processes listed, describing what their inputs are and what their outputs are. And then most helpful thing, I think, is the supplier is the people who give you the input, and the customer is who wants your output for their next step. And so
it's like a start to end process almost.
Right. So with a SIPOC, you can usually build a swim lane diagram, a very complete one, because the supplier is where the arrow started, the lane that the arrow started, and the process is what you're going to label your box, and the customer is the swim lane where your arrow goes next. And you can just kind of map this thing through. And the great thing about a SIPOC is it's very easy to brainstorm in a non-judgmental way. Like there's no wrong answers almost, as long as you follow the format. People can keep just brainstorming more and more and more unit processes. And at some point you might say, okay, that's fine. After you're done brainstorming, we'll talk, that's all those ones. Let's cover those in a different picture.
Yeah. And actually, this is a great way to even visualize how much pressure there is on a single team to provide input.
Yeah, right.
And that's something that I remember being used to see how much pressure, for example, one of our teams had when it comes to them supplying, well, it was my team actually, which was the HR business partnering team. We supplied way too much input. There was too much emphasis or too much focus on that input to help kind of build the processes at the end. And that showed how much we needed to kind of, well, deprioritize some processes and maybe even hand them off to other departments.
In a similar way, this can be really helpful to help educate other teams about the work that they might not be aware of. Just as you say, team, some hidden work might get bubbled up as this team has a lot more to do than everybody realized. This can help people understand what all does need to happen when previously they only saw a small slice.
That is very true, actually.
I like SIPOCs a lot. There's a tertiary benefit to them that people will often include work they're doing. When you're brainstorming, they'll just include work. And sometimes you can turn that into a conversation of, well, why are you doing that work? Because it usually becomes pretty evident to everybody that maybe there's just this like closed loop of 3 or 4 processes that doesn't seem to interact with anything else. And maybe it starts you thinking about, why are we doing that at all?
I like this. So you're saying that's even if you want to break it down a little bit, or at least for me to break it down for myself, you can even start off from the center, building up those processes that you have, and then kind of going slowly to the sides to understand how that process might impact, or how that process might be filled, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah.
And then based on that, you can see what its value chain almost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You can learn a lot in not very much time about how a business works by getting 3 people in a room and doing a SIPOC for big groups. This stuff is great. I think this is my favorite Six Sigma tool. Or maybe not favorite, the most undersold,
I like that
the most underrated tool.
I think it is for sure. And I think it's a tool that could easily set up a lot of teams for success and visualizing their processes. You don't need any fancy sort of apps. Don't need any fancy diagram building apps or anything else like that. You just can sit down, put it into a list, and see how it goes, or where it goes, I should say. So Dylan, here's the interesting thing about this. This kind of seems to me like it's an input-output sort of thing, with a little bit of roles and responsibilities on who handles what. But what if we wanted to go a little bit deeper on the roles and responsibilities piece? I think there's another tool that kind of fits into that, and even could be an add-on to the SIPOC.
Yeah. So we had talked earlier about how a swim lane diagram is often helpful for a lot of people use it for blame assignment. So if this part doesn't get done well, you clearly know which swim lane it's in. But there's a better tool. And so a lot of people like RACIs. RACIs are the ultimate blame assigning tool. We speak a little tongue in cheek, but they are super helpful to have everybody clear on what you are responsible for. And it makes an interesting distinction. So RACI is another acronym. So you run the things that are important down the side, what you would call the accountabilities. You are making sure this thing happens. And then you have the teams that are involved along the top. And then at their intersection, you can choose one of 4 letters, R, A, C, and I.
And remind us what that actually, okay, thank you.
The R stands for responsible. The responsible person is or team is the one who actually gets the work done. Accountable is the one whose fault it is if it doesn't get done. Consulted is someone who should be listened to about how it gets done. Maybe they have a stake in how it gets done. Maybe they're a customer of it, internal customer. And informed is they want to know that it got done, but they don't really have a voice in how. And often, so there are several rules when you're creating one of these. And I'm going to get a little salty, but A is the most important to get right. For each capability, you have exactly one A. You may not have 2 A's. You may not have 4 A's. You have 1 A. You may not have 0 A's either. Only one team
Has the sign
is
off.
to blame if it doesn't happen right.
Yep.
You can have lots of responsibles like you see here. The other fun one is the informed. Informed is the participation trophy of a RACI. Like this is what you give to, if you're a project manager and you have a stakeholder that should not be here, should not be involved, doesn't need to be in the meetings, and you want to give them a feel-good assignment, you put I next to their name on a capability, and then they feel good about themselves. That's usually what it's there for.
I remember when assigning I's, we usually assign them to, for example, leadership teams and things like that, where they want to get, no, it's true, because these are the guys that want to get updated on how things are running, sure, but they don't usually decide a lot of things, and they usually don't have a stake in it. If it was a steering committee, on the other hand, that's a different thing, right?
That would be a consultant. Yes. I just laugh because like here I just got done saying that the I is the participation trophy, and they don't have any real meat or value they bring, and you just identified that with leadership. Yeah, well, I mean, probably funnier than it sounds, but now I feel sad when I think about it. Well, often it's appropriate because those senior leaders do want to know, and they do want to be consulted, but natural reporting. Yes, we are the peasants, if I want to quote last week's podcast. Sure. Peasants do a lot of the responsibility, and usually middle management, from what I see, usually do the accountability. That's often true. Yeah, the lowest point at which the buck stops is that's a fun job. So how does this ring for you, Maha, in your roles? How has this worked when you see these? So I didn't see many of these, which tells you a lot about how chaotic my organization was. And I remember working on a project. It was kind of like my last big project, where I had a cross-functional process where literally no one knew what their role was. And I keep asking questions. They're like, yeah, I just get this from this team, and then I don't know how to handle it because the person was also not trained. And then that's it. And I'm like, but who approves what you've just decided on, for example, or who signs it off? Because this is kind of from a budget perspective, quite a lot of money, and there was no assignment at all. So I've at that time decided, okay, this is a cross-functional team where 6 individuals from 3 different teams are working on one single process flow. Yes. And they were and they were using at least 3 different softwares for that one single process flow. The process flow was actually approving, basically approving any sort of contractor, approving any sort of external workforce. It used to go, it used to be, the accountability used to actually sit with procurement. Accountability shifted into HR because procurement decided this is a human resource aspect. The system was the system was built and designed to support procurement processes, was not designed for HR processes. That I needed to work on another project. But then the whole kind of blame game, if you even want to call that, shifted. So a RACI actually helped redistribute the blame a little bit, of saying, look, this is your job. This is how you approve it. You shall not approve this on behalf of HR anymore. This needs to be approved within the HR sphere. I understand this is budgetary, but it's also adding to a shadow organization that already is massive. So we need, for example, we need to be, even if we're not on the accountable piece, we're responsible for it, or we would actually be the accountable piece from now on. So the accountability mostly focused, the A that we're talking about, the accountability actually focused on HR, but then we split
the responsibility, consultation and inform, and who needed to be informed based on well, how the process flow is going to happen now that the blame got shifted. I've also used a RACI, interestingly enough, to distribute myself when I was running a massive amount of projects, transformation projects. You want to hear about how I did that?
Yes, I do.
So I obviously can't have my, well, I used to call myself at least the octopus. So I had my hands in almost everything because I was more, I'm the ADHDer, right? So I would see a problem, initiate it. My boss then would assign it to the right team. But then if that happens, I would lose accountability, or I would use responsibility, but then I would either be consultative or informed in this case. A majority of the roles that I focused on, so when it came to how many projects I wanted to be responsible with, I actually had a maximum amount of 5 projects to run at the same time. So I could only give myself 5 hours.
Sure.
Then when it came to, for example, being informed, I saw that as waste. Do I really want to be informed of this process, or do I really just want to know when the process is done and that's it? So I removed waste by also limiting how many things I want to be informed on, because for me, that is just analysis paralysis, way too much information. I just don't need it. Consultative, because I like having opinions, and because I am the one that usually initiated the process. So I was on a consultative basis because I help the teams stay focused on the ball and why we're doing it, and not add any sort of really interesting things such as we're going to lean a process when we're actually missing a lot of key steps in a process, for example. So that's how I used RACI to kind of organize myself and the sort of information that I wanted to have on my plate.
Right.
You smiled a little bit on the I one, so tell me.
Yeah, because I had forgotten about that. What you just said is one of the reasons why I often think of eyes as being like it's a participation trophy, because if you trust some other team well enough to do a good job at the R's and the C's and the A's, why do you care? Like, it's not worth your time to get to go read the status updates. Just if they have a problem, and you can help, they should come to you. It should not be your job to go babysit them. And I think that when teams have real well-defined roles, and that can help build trust to other teams, because now you realize, oh, I got a lot of stuff to do. I don't have time to go read status reports for somebody else's project. I need to trust them to tell me when they need help. Oh
God, I love that you use the word trust, because that's kind of the thing. You actually dictate trust in this case. And we talked about that even in the last episode, right? Where if you really want to actually give people autonomy, and you don't want to be the manager, the imperialistic manager who controls exactly what they do, you need to give them a lot of room. You need to give them a lot of trust. The informed should be informed for a nice basis, for example. So I would give an example of a status meeting where all of you sit down and all of you share what you're doing. These are the projects I'm working on. This is for me, the I. You don't need to give them that status report. You do not need to give them anything. This is how this is going. This is done. Versus leadership team, I could be a little bit different with that little placard that you need to send them every once in a while. Right. Yeah. I am very tempted by an alternate style of reporting, which is, if I don't tell you anything, it's good. I only tell you the barriers to my success. And that, like, building that requires a lot of trust into the relationship and into the culture of the organization as well. What if I told you that, interestingly enough, that could have very much opposite circumstances from a cultural basis sometimes, where there are a lot of countries and there are a lot of types of people, not just from a cultural perspective, but even from a personality perspective, where they're going to keep things till last minute, and you don't want that. Yeah, and sure. And so, or they would not say no, or it's just in their
Mhm.
nature from a cultural perspective to not tell you anything is wrong.
Mhm.
I'll give you an example. My country is a
Mhm.
gigantic one for that. You're going to tell them, hey, there are workers being abused, and they're going to just gaslight you. No, they're not. Everything is okay. And then in the background, they're just going to fix everything.
Mhm.
But
Yeah, man.
you need to put you need
Mhm.
to put people sometimes, I wouldn't say on the spot. You just need to have that clear kind of line of communication, because maybe
Mhm.
they're going to remember that they need help from someone. Maybe they're going to remember that something is going to
Mhm.
happen, i.e. morning stand-ups.
Right, right. So tell me, I guess,
And actually good
if
for
you're
sharing
gonna,
ideas, by the way, and creativity.
sure,
I
yeah,
just will
water
throw out there, I'm a
cooling.
big supporter of open
Mhm.
communication for that reason.
Mhm.
Do not,
Mhm.
if
Yeah.
everything's going okay, if that's your thing, it's your thing. But sometimes
Mhm.
you need to keep that line of communication open, because maybe someone's going to be able to help you on a certain step, um, or you might have missed something and they might be able to help you with it too.
Yeah, maybe so. I'll have to think about that.
Mhm.
So fair enough. Well, we covered a lot around accountability so far. We've covered the swim lanes and how that's kind of the start. You really the SIPOC and the RACI mixed together gives you a swim lane. Maybe a little less granular and specific than either one.
Mhm.
But let's say someone wants to start optimizing and wants to start thinking, where's the waste in this system? Where does it represent how frustrating that one box is? What would they use to detect that?
I would not have a clue.
It's our one left.
Oh yes, spaghetti.
Should I ask again?
No, I just said spaghetti. Okay, sorry.
I'm gonna ask again anyway.
Okay.
So a lot of the things we've talked about, the three tools that we talked about focused on accountability. In some ways, the RACI and the SIPOC together you get a swim lane diagram, because it combines a bit of process and it combines a bit of accountability and maybe a little less granularity. But say you're the sort of person that really wants to go after the optimization and the tightening up of those lines between the boxes, or maybe that getting frustrated by all the hairiness inside the box. Mm-hmm. What would you do about that if you wanted to pursue those sorts of goals?
I would go into observation mode and really observe how not only people, but even processes or in the information data within the processes actually moves or flows. So you really see the granular level of that. And that probably looks really hairy and spaghetti-like.
Sure. So you're thinking maybe time and motion studies, or just sitting there and watching how people work and what they do and what they click on and how often they say "arg."
I don't know if my team has pirates. That would have been cooler, but I would say both, to be honest. I mean, isn't that now the new trophy of process improvement, which is process mining and having those logs of how information flows from one place to another and how long a ticket might take to flow from one place to another, from basically customer back to customer?
Yes, it is.
So,
do you have an example for us?
Nope. I actually had a thought when you told me that we were going to discuss something like the spaghetti diagram, which you're going to show us. I actually had a hard time, because I was like, okay, you know what? I can see my operations manager being on the plant site, having a bird's eye view, for example, and kind of drawing out how his staff or her staff, both can do it. Everyone, or their staff, I should say, to be more inclusive, actually moves from one place to the next. They used to do that not only to understand how people flowed from kind of one step of the process to the next, but they also did it from a hazard removal perspective too.
Yeah.
What do you think? Does that actually
I
make
mean,
sense? Because for me, I just couldn't even understand how I would do it digitally. How would I do
yeah,
something like that digitally, and why?
I think you're right that that's like 70% of the value of a spaghetti diagram, and we'll show one, but it shows where people move or where a part moves, and you get a sense for how wasteful the movement is,
I was saying
because
that.
the more you have to walk, or the further the part has to move, is wasted time. And it's really visceral when you see how gross it is. And also it shows you how inconsistent it can be, because if you have someone walking, maybe between 3 different stations, just a lot, and then they always take the same route to go get maybe a sub-assembly and come back, or they're doing
Maybe they're going to bump into each other.
right. Well, right. Yeah. But if they're always doing the same thing, that gives you a sense that this is a pretty standard thing for them. But if they're taking different routes and stuff, it gives you a visual sense of there's not a normal way that they're doing their work. And maybe that's okay. Maybe there's just a lot of variables and they're making good calls all along the way, but they're kind of fun. Do you have one?
I don't know even if I have one, to be honest. I would say if I want to think about a swim lane, I would think about how for managers that are very vehemently against working from home, there's a lot of waste of movement and a lot of waste of time going from one meeting to the next that maybe they don't think about. Because by the time, let's say, if you have an employee with a huge focus on meetings, and if they're moving from one building to the next and one floor to the next to actually attend those meetings, that's 5 minutes maybe, or 3 minutes per meeting. And if you accumulate that, that might be about 15, 25, 30 minutes wasted per day just moving from one meeting to the next. That actually could be spent on other meetings or spent on emails and responses and things like that. And if you kind of count those on a daily basis, they don't seem that big maybe, but on an annual basis, you're probably gaining a few days to a few weeks by just allowing your staff to work from home and take meetings from home. That's just my point.
Right. Yeah.
What do you think? Is it even a good example?
Yeah. I mean, it goes both ways. I think I've heard some people counter that point with, well, it feels good to get up and stretch my legs every so often. It feels bad to just sit all day long. And I don't find that particularly compelling. I remember there was a VP down the hall, sales VP, and he would just pace, and he was on his headset the whole day. He would just like run circles. Nobody could tell, but man, he was getting his steps in. So I find the argument that physical meetings are like necessary for physical movement and health not very compelling. Like, I think there's other ways you can do that, and I do,
like going for an
actual,
like going for an actual walk in nature versus the concrete jungle. No, I mean, pacing in your own room actually sounds, I'm sorry to say this, but sad. It's like a tiger pacing in kind of the cage and stuff like that versus, never mind. I shouldn't compare people to like that. But if I go back to the point, if I go back to the point though, I mean, there are people who just police minutes. I won't lie. But anyways, give me a better example, please.
So I did a couple spaghetti diagrams of virtual workflows. So, and I think in a normal spaghetti diagram,
Mhm.
the act of like sitting up there and you're drawing their route
Mhm.
from this workstation to that workstation to this area is the act. That is the way you're measuring waste. Like you're seeing waste happen in front of you, and so making the diagram is how you're measuring it. If you're doing it virtually, you're not. That doesn't really make sense, and you might as well. The best way to measure the waste is with a time and motion study. You can either sit behind someone with a stopwatch and take some meaningful, watch some meaningful section of their work, or
monitor their log entries as well. Enter
yeah,
logs.
right. Yeah, you can. There's some real nice and creepy applications that you can plug into your websites that track where everybody moves their mouse, and
yes,
and so you can use those to do time and motion studies as well, especially for common tasks that are scalable like customer service, and that's what we're talking about here. So in this hypothetical example, you see this customer service rep in the middle, and they've got 4 applications, CRM, and maybe 3 ERPs. Maybe their company acquired 2 other companies, and they're using one central CRM, but they haven't integrated the ERPs yet, and so they have at least 3 product lines from their company and the other 2 acquisitions. And so.
That means that they're spending way too much time, it seems, on the CRM. I can see that at least from down there with the work history and stuff like that. But let's talk about the ERP3, the inventory status. So this wiggly long line is that 20 minutes, right?
Well, yeah. So maybe one of their calls, they had to do an inventory status check for a customer, and that took them a long time. It took them 20 minutes to do. So this is a little bit interesting. You can see in the time observed, this customer service rep used ERP3 twice. One was a pretty quick, where there wasn't a lot of time associated, but another task did take a long time. So when you're drawing these spaghetti diagrams in a virtual process, you're directly scaling the length of the path to that corresponding to that task with and so it doesn't have direct connection to the length they're walking, but it's a way of communicating viscerally in the same way that just people walking around a shop floor might. And so you can show a picture that this person's interactions with ERP1 are pretty slick. They're pretty easy. There's a lot of variation in CRM because they use it a lot. There's a lot of lines going over there. Some of them take a long time, some of them don't. But what this might tell you, just this brief picture, is even though this maybe this customer service person's name is Betty, maybe Betty really complains because she has it in her head that ERP takes a long time to do inventory status checks, but maybe Betty, it might be worth more to improve the efficiency of Betty using the CRM, just because there's a lot more volume here. And that these studies and depicting it visually can be a really helpful way of helping people understand how their paths or their work can be more efficient. I have one other picture. Wow. I have one other picture where you have this IT process. Maybe someone's requesting a server, and the flows go from team to team. Maybe things happen. Very similar time and motion studies, where this one was you're following someone's path to different systems. This one you're following, the people are static and you're following the part, right? Or in this case, it's a virtual part. It's a ticket that gets worked on by different people as it flows through this factory of ideas, this knowledge work. And so from this picture, you might say, oh boy, sometimes it takes a whole really long time to design the network segmentation. And sometimes it takes a really long time to provision access. And sometimes people get really confused by the request form. So you can just, through only maybe 5 or 10 data sets, just following a ticket all the way through, you can draw a really helpful picture that can clarify the true need that people have, and the value and the opportunity, where the biggest opportunities are in your process.
See, thank you for that, Dylan, because for me, like I said, whenever I think of an actual motion kind of item, I think of motion analytics, where they actually monitor how people, like you said, move it through a store, where they focus on, and how long they stay in one segment or one section versus the other. I never thought of it as the movement of a ticket or the movement of something abstract like that, actually. But thank you, Dylan, for your time. I know that we have a lot more to talk about in the next lesson, in the next lessons, or in the next meetings as well. So how about you close us off with one more fun fact about RACI? Is it RACI or is it RACI? What's the debate?
RACI.
Oh, damn it.
RACI. There's no debate. I love them. All these are great tools for you and your daily life. You could apply a spaghetti diagram. Just watch your significant other walk around the kitchen trying to find pots and pans, or watch your kids try to find their backpack. There are huge opportunities here. Maybe you and your significant other have a bathroom cleaning accountability problem, and all you need is a RACI to build trust where that's faltering in your life.
Well, there you go. Thank you again, Dylan, for your time. And thanks again to our listeners for listening to our rantings yet once again. We hope that this was an informative lesson with a lot of really cool tools that you could use, like we said, not only for your business life, but also for your personal life. If you do use any of these tools on a personal or private, or on a corporate level, do share your experience with them. And until then, see, that wasn't too hard. Oh my God. More enthusiasm, Dylan. One more time. That wasn't too hard. Okay. I love the awkwardness. I'm keeping this.
Yeah. Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Maha.
Take
Bye,
care,
friends.
Dylan.
We'll talk to you all next week.